friends, welcome back to Room 237, and I'm back with another review of a shocking, disturbing, twisted, effed up, whatever you want to call it, horror film. Now, if you remember a while back, I kind of did a run-through of my controversial, shocking, disturbing collection, and one of the films I did is one I was a very big fan of, the 1987 German film, Nekromantik, which I'm still a very big fan of. But one I didn't get to, which was, it came in this very nice box set by Cult Epics, a nice Blu-ray set, was I never got to Nekromantik 2, the 1991 sequel. Even though I had it, just for whatever reason, I never got around to it. I watched it, but I don't know why I didn't review it. Maybe I just wanted to get on with something else. But now I'm going to finally get to it. It has the same director, Jorg Garrett, if I pronounce that correctly. I'm probably going to get a lot of these names wrong. And it's actually much longer than the original film. This ran 75 minutes. This runs 103. And this one takes a bit more of a serious tone, whereas this one was definitely, I mean, it had some camp to it, but it was still meant to be a shocking exploitation film. And what I really like about the original is most shocking, disturbing horror films try to have some sort of meaning or hidden meaning or like a metaphor or something. This movie is just an exploitation film just meant to piss off, gross out, disturb, and shock its viewers. And I really respect that. And I really just like the low-key story and low-budget look of the film. Which this one does. It still has a very low budget, but it does look more like a professionally made film. I can't remember what the budget of the first film was. Actually, this doesn't even say how much the second film was made for. But it's also known as Return of the Loving Dead, which I think is funny. And this one's definitely more of a love story than the previous one, where we see the character of Rob, played by, what was it, Daktari Lorenz. It opens up with his suicide, and then this new character named Monica, played by Monica M., she digs up his body and tries to have a sexual relationship with him. That's kind of the first half, but before I get into the rest of it, so yeah, it was written and directed by Jorg Garrett, but also written by Franz Rodenkirchen, if I pronounce that correctly. And its two main stars is Monica M. and Mark Reeder, who plays Mark, her potential living love interest. The cinematography by Manfred O. Jelinski, which about him, a kind of interesting story is, this was one of, if not the first film to be completely seized and confiscated without any kind of trial or hearing since the end of World War II. And there was a police raid by Jelinski where everything relating to this film was confiscated because they were looking for the negatives. And some people have said that the head of censorship or whatever had some sort of grudge against the theater where this played or where this premiered, which was a theater that played a lot of more hardcore films and propaganda films dating all the way back to World War II. But just kind of a interesting story about both the film and the cinematographer. Now the music, which it is one of the best parts of the movie, was actually scored by several people. A Herman Kopp, who I believe did the score for the original, even though it does not say. Both films contain the soundtrack, but it doesn't say who did it. But Herman Kopp, Peter Kowalski, Daktari Lorenz, which I think he had a hand in this as well, because I know the character of Rob had was more than just the actor. Also, a guy named John Boy Walton, which I think is very hilarious. And actually, I think this is wrong because this says approximately 103 minutes, but both. But excuse me, Wikipedia says 111 minutes, and when I checked the time on the PlayStation, it said like an hour 41. So I'm not sure if there is extra footage out there somewhere. But anyway, so yeah, it opens up. Well, actually, before I get into that, another kind of interesting thing was this was filmed shortly after the reunification of Berlin. So there's certain scenes that take place in the former East Berlin, like her apartment, and then other scenes that took place in the former West Berlin. Oh, and the theater that supposedly had a grudge was in Munich. And so when it actually opens up with his suicide is probably my favorite scene of the movie because it's shown in black and white. And just with the score and no other audio, like the character of Rob screaming or anything, it has this very German expressionist look to it that I'm a huge fan of. But then it switches to color, shows Monica digging him up. The only kind of hint that we get of how she knows about Rob and anything about him was that we do see some newspapers with the picture of Rob, and you can tell it depicts his crimes. So that's how she found out about him. And there's actually a scene where the ex-girlfriend from this film shows up to dig him up, but his grave is already, been defiled. But she finds out while having sex with the corpse that she is disgusted and vomits, which leads to the idea that the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak, and she kind of has to force herself to. All the while, there's this guy named Mark who works at a porno dubbing studio where him and this female partner, they watch pornography without the sound, and they record all the vocal sound effects and all the other sound effects. And some of those can be very lengthy scenes. And another thing I found very interesting that I really liked was seeing him record the sound effects is really the first bit of dialogue that we have in this film. And it's about 20 minutes in. There's really not much dialogue to this at all. I mean, there's some, but most of the dialogue is when Mark and Monica go on their first date, which is this film made for this film, which is a parody of My Dinner with Andre, where it shows a man and a woman naked eating boiled eggs talking about birds. Show it in black and white so it looks like a classy art film. But the whole discussion about birds in that film is the bulk of the dialogue. And I'm not sure if this was meant to be any kind of meaning or theme, or if it was even intentional, but the fact that she's this aspiring necrophile, and he works at this porno theater. They're both these kind of sexual, almost perverse kind of things about themselves that when two people meet might not want to bring up. Like maybe someone who is involved in pornography in any way is like, my job is to, and maybe be embarrassed. But someone else has an even darker secret. One other thing would be the effects. I mean, Rob is pretty decomposed. I'm not sure how long it takes after this film, but yeah, they really went all out on trying to make this guy look. I mean, he's all green. They must have went through a shit ton of KY jelly because he is completely drippy and slimy. And it's really gross when they show up close of them kissing, and she like sticks her tongue like in his lips, and there's just strings of slime. It's pretty gross. But her and Mark start this romance because he was going to take this one woman to the movies, but she was late. Then Monica shows up. He offers her the ticket. They go in, and they start dating. I do like how Monica was cast, because when the director met her, he was impressed that she was a huge fan of Lucio Fulci, and that she had seen his previous film, which I'm not even going to try to remember to pronounce, because I don't remember. But I think it came out before Nekromantik. In fact, it might even be one of the postcards that came with the film. Nope, it didn't. Nope. But anyway. And again, I love how the score, they did go for a more serious tone in the score for this one. Like, they wanted it to elicit exactly what emotion you should be feeling. Like, when it's a more loving scene, it's like a romantic one piano piece. Or if it's a more disturbing scene, it's like this, like, dun 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 dun. But I really like the music, especially when it shows the initial scene of Monica going through the graveyard. Also, I guess to show how serious the actresses were, the audition process, they had the actresses for the character Monica audition the lovemaking scene with her and Rob's corpse. And they realized that none of them took it as seriously as themselves. And then they gave it to Monica M. Now, eventually, her and Mark do end up having sex, but Monica does not climax, and you can tell that she is very disappointed. She just kind of lays there very somberly afterwards, very disappointed and sad. In fact, even before, I think it's before then, is when she decides to get rid of Rob. She dismembers him, which is a pretty, it shows her with a saw, cutting him up, only saving his head and his genitals. Then they have sex, and she realizes this partner's very disappointing. But then Mark notices the severed genitals in her fridge, but doesn't say anything. And then apparently Monica is also part of this, like, a woman's club of necrophiles. She has all of them over to watch a film, which the unsettling, authentic animal cruelty scene in this one was a rabbit. The one in this is a seal but it does look to be in like a, for whatever reason, a professional uh, setting, like a slaughterhouse or something. And we see the seal get dissected and skinned. And even though the seal's already dead, it's still not great to watch. And they're all watching it with with Rob's head on the coffee table. Mark comes home. When he asks what she was up to, she shows him the seal tape. He's grossed out. They have a fight. And then they have these very weird dream sequences where she's singing some song. I couldn't even really make out what she was saying. I do like the look of like the all black with just the giant skull kind of rotating. And the look of her standing by the piano that the guy's playing with just this all black around her is very Lynchian, I thought. And Mark has a dream where he's buried up to his neck, and then Monica comes up and either stomps on his head or hits it with a hammer. She hits him in the head with something. But anyway, they talk. She then goes to the ocean to contemplate, what do I do? Because her and Mark had just talked on the phone, decided to meet up and talk things over. So we don't know what her decision is until we get to the very last scene, which, in the main menu, everything that plays is the very last scene. And I would say the ending scene is my second favorite behind the opening. Because again, I love how the opening is shown, like with no audio except for the score, the black and white, the really degraded look of the first film gives it this awesome, just bloody, messed up German expressionist look. But here, Mark and Monica are having sex. She reaches behind her, pulls out a cleaver, and hits her right in the neck. And I do like the look, the shot kind of over her shoulder. After she gives him a whack, he like spits a mouthful of blood all over the wall behind her. She completely hacks his head off, replaces it with Rob's, and she finally climaxes. And she lays there with the body. And then the final scene is her at the doctor's being told that she's pregnant. And then it ended the film. Now, the director would go on to continue the story in the form of comic books. I haven't read any of them, so I'm not sure where the story goes. Now, as far as these two films together, I think it does tell a very twisted love story or a romance tale. I am a bigger fan of this one. I mean, you can definitely tell a story like this in 75 minutes. I would say a lot of this does kind of drag, whether it's the egg-eating, bird-talking a theater scene or the scene with the seal film. There's a very long sequence of them on their first official date, which is at a carnival. So some of it does kind of drag. I mean, it probably could have been told in 80 or 90 minutes. But, it totally doesn't kill the film. But I would say it's a worthy sequel. I mean, I would say it's just as twisted as the first one in its own way. Maybe this one has a bit more gross out scenes or more messed up horror scenes. But I think this one is a plenty worthy sequel. It definitely go great as a messed up double feature. I am very glad to have both films in the Cult Epics Blu-ray set. I do like how they both came with slipcovers. So yeah, where this is one of my favorite of all the notorious, shocking, disturbing, just extreme horror films. This one is one of my favorites. I probably would put this in the top 10, but it still is a. It's certainly competently made. I mean, it's well acted for at least for the two parts that are important, the parts of Monica and Mark. The effects, whether it be Rob's body when she's hacking him up, or when she finally kills Mark at the end, you know, it's all awesome. The score is great as well. I love the score. And I do kind of like the arc where, she kind of wants to be this necrophile, but is grossed out, yet she's having a hard time parting with the corpse. But then, hey, she might have found true love in a living person, with someone that has maybe a bit sexually perverse side to them, even though it's their job. Say for normal society, like for normal people, maybe like a big hang up would be, I dub pornography. But for a necrophile, it's not really that much. It's someone with a bigger secret. So yeah, it's certainly a worthy sequel. It looks good for its low budget. It was shot well, but I'm still just a much bigger fan of the original. I'm a huge sucker for this one. And which could be why my favorite scene of this is also the opening, but I loved what they did with it. I love the German expressionist look to it. But yeah, so now I've done both a Nekromantik films, and I did just get Wi-Fi and Hulu back, so I can now go through Hulu and see what I want to review. So I'm not sure what's coming up next, but stay tuned for whatever it is, and thank you for watching.